Paycock would tackle the Irish Civil War, a conflict that erupted after a problematic treaty was signed to end the War of Independence. The treaty divided Ireland into North and South. The South was granted independence, but was still required to pledge allegiance to the British Crown. A large percentage of the Irish public supported the treaty, but to hardline revolutionaries, it was totally unacceptable. The resulting clash was a bloodbath, in which brothers who'd fought together just weeks before against the British were now pitted against each other.
There were cousins fighting cousins, fathers, sons, and so on. That made it appalling. How can you, because of political ideas and principles, suddenly look at somebody in your family and put a gun between their eyes? That's what, it went beyond humanity.
In 1924, with the wounds of Civil War still fresh, O'Casey's Juno and the Paycock premiered. The play tells the story of matriarch Juno Boyle and her family, who are expecting a large inheritance that never arrives. Juno's son Johnny, a wounded veteran of the 1916 rebellion, is now fighting in the Civil War.
Johnny, her son, who was already maimed, his arm was twisted when he was fighting in 1916. And he says, now it's 1922, he says, I do it again, Ma, because a principle's a principle. And Juno says to him, my boy, you lost your best principle when you lost your right arm. And that's so useful for O'Casey. He's against the principle that abstractly makes people die for Ireland. He wants them to live for Ireland.
That's the kinds of craziness that O'Casey is talking about. That patriotism it's blind and it's stupid.
Juno drew such large crowds in its first week that it had to be extended. The first time in the Abbey Theatre's 20-year history that a play had run longer than 1 week.
Lady Gregory is said to have remarked, we lived our life for moments like this, where someone like O'Casey could come out of the lower end of society and write a play, and it would be successful in the Abbey Theatre. We lived for this moment.
O'Casey's cut on Juno's earnings was £25, a sum that allowed him to quit his job as a manual laborer and write full-time. His play's financial success also provided a critical shot in the arm to the Abbey Theatre.
He's been credited with actually saving the Abbey as an organization because he brought in money at a time when they really were struggling for it.
But with the third play of the Dublin trilogy, O'Casey's relationship with the Abbey would be tested. When he submitted The Plough and the Stars, Abbey directors balked at its controversial content. O'Casey set the play during the 1916 Easter Rising, considered the birth of Ireland's independence movement. He was lampooning the heroic rebels who had martyred themselves for Irish freedom.
O'Casey's writing this play that, from the Republican point of view, is basically mocking the 1916 uprising. Instead of showing the heroism of the Easter Rising or the courage or the self-sacrifice or whatever, he's kind of showing the underbelly of it or the everything that's wrong with it.
Although O'Casey's other plays had challenged war and patriotism, this time the event was too sacred. Mocking it was considered blasphemy. Abbey directors asked O'Casey to change the play. He refused and threatened to withdraw it altogether. Not wanting to censor one of Ireland's most promising writers, the Abbey finally relented, and in February 1926, an only slightly modified Plough and the Stars opened to record crowds. The play, about a community of tenement dwellers whose men are called to fight in the Easter Rising, portrays the women and children as the true heroes, the men as misguided, drunk, and absurdly patriotic. But O'Casey didn't stop there. This play took on one more taboo subject: sex. One of his characters is a prostitute named Rosie Redmond.
Irish women are supposed to be chaste and pure and never have sexual desire or sexual activity with anybody. And to acknowledge that there are some women who've been forced into doing this for a living, it's part of that tenement reality. This is something that, these women are driven to because they don't have any other avenue of employment. It ends with this image of kind of utter destruction and decay, and the sort of the overall message of the play is, you know, this was not the birth of a nation, this was the miscarriage of a nation.
Word spread about the play's politically incorrect content. By the fourth night of the performance, when actress Ria Mooney appeared on stage as the prostitute, it was clear O'Casey had finally gone too far.
After my first couple of lines, I heard hissing in the theatre. And the next thing, a lump of coal hit me on the ankle. There was a young man up in the balcony with a dark hair and a pale face, and he shouted at me to get off the stage, that I was a disgrace to my sex, my religion, and my country. I don't know which one he put first, but anyway.
Shouts from the hostile audience drowned out the actor's lines, and flying objects made it impossible to proceed. Police were finally called in to break up the riot.
To have given up your son or given up your husband or your lover or whatever to this revolution, and then to have O'Casey on an Irish National Theatre putting on this play that basically says this was a mistake. Not only did it not really liberate Ireland, it actually made things worse. And that was just something the Republicans were not ready to hear at that point.
Yeats was at the Abbey the night of the riot and castigated the crowd.
Yeats came bounding out on the stage to oppose the howling mob, and he's shouting out of them, "You have disgraced yourselves again." And then when the roaring became worse and they shouted out against O'Casey, he roared out at them with all the venom and vehemence that was in the great man. He shouted out at them, "This is O'Casey's apotheosis." I was wondering all the way home, what in the name of God was the meaning of apotheosis, and what had happened to O'Casey that he had such an honour conferred on him. It was only when I got home, and quietly and secretly, looked up the dictionary, I discovered that O'Casey was translated up into the gods.
Despite the standing ovations the play received on subsequent nights, the sting of protest lingered. O'Casey left Ireland soon after the Abbey riot to oversee a London production of Juno and the Paycock. He published a bitter response to protesters in the London newspapers, writing, "The Irish have no time for those who don't agree with their ideas, and I have no time for those who don't agree with mine." O'Casey's words did little to cool tensions back home. He stayed on in London to finish work on an experimental new play about World War I called The Silver Tassie. He sent it to the Abbey in 1928.
He got this really nasty letter from Yeats about what was wrong with the play, telling him, you have no subject, you've got no business dealing with this, you don't have any connection to the Great War, the play's too political, there's too many, it reads like a leading article from a newspaper. He wasn't bothering to phrase it tactfully.
For the first time in years, O'Casey was rejected. He blamed Yeats and took their fight public in a debate played out in the daily newspapers.
O'Casey was one of these people who, once he had decided that you'd betrayed him or whatever, you were out. And after he got the rejections and he got all the letters that had gone back and forth about the play, he didn't want anything more to do with them.
But as much as O'Casey fought publicly against Yeats, privately he was crushed. Crushed by rejection, crushed by Yeats and Lady Gregory, crushed by Ireland. O'Casey remained in London, and then, after marrying and starting a family, moved to a coastal town in Devon, England.
Unfortunately, Lady Gregory died before he really buried the hatchet with her. And, you know, this is a sad thing when you think about it. She was really his mentor. She discovered him. She sends him this letter. She says, I'm coming over to England. I'd love to see you and your wife and the baby. And he writes back to her and says, we can't do it. I mean, if I see you, I'm going to fight with you.
He was too heartbroken. He couldn't. And later on, when he didn't do that, he was sorry over the fact that he was wrong. She made an attempt to see him, and he refused. So he understood that he had made a terrible mistake. And I think he was big enough to accept it, but too late.
The Silver Tassie was eventually performed at the Abbey, 3 years after Lady Gregory's death. Even in exile, O'Casey would continue to use Ireland as the setting of his dramatic work.
The riots in the theater, the attacks in the press, the attacks from the clergy, from the pulpit, the attacks by the patriots, quite clearly it was difficult in those years to live in Ireland. But you could be completely Irish if you were not harried all the time, attacked all the time. So O'Casey in Devon was completely Dublinese. He was completely Irish outside of Ireland. And that was the paradox of Ireland.
In later years, O'Casey spoke of his enduring love for his home country, where he would never live again.
We're all Irish, and we carry our Irish spirit and our Irish characteristics with us wherever we may go. God or nature has given our world a colourful, delightful, and abundant variety of peoples. But there is only one race, the human race. We're all one, flesh of each other's flesh and bone of each other's bone.
There's always the longing. When you're in it, well, there you are. You get up in the morning, you don't say, I'm Irish. When you're away, you're looking at Ireland from another perspective, and you have different emotions. That's the thing.
Sean O'Casey wrote 25 plays, several works of prose, and 6 autobiographies in his lifetime. But he is best known for the Dublin Trilogy, with its dramatic depictions of tenement life and political satire. The Dublin Trilogy became the most performed plays at the Abbey Theatre and would be shown all over the world. Upon O'Casey's death in 1964 at age 84, his obituary read, "From the bitterness of poverty, in the drab streets and 2-story brick boxes of Dublin slums, until his aging years of self-driven British exile, this gaunt, fiery writer never abandoned his faith in the dignity of man."
I asked him once, I said, why do you write at all, Sean? He said, it's the only way I can keep something alive. Writing is living. When you write, when you create something, it never dies. That's what he said. That's why he writes.